Hi, this is Mariah Gullo from The Hollywood Reporter, and I'm in studio with Kenneth Branagh today, and we're talking about Murder on the Orient Express. This was a massive project for you, directing and starring, shot on film, beloved adaptation, huge cast, period piece, enormous set. So where do we begin? What intimidated you the most about this project?
It was probably how to manage all of those things, particularly the actors, I suppose, even though that's my, point of departure. It's what I do for a living, but in a way that makes it, you're more aware that you're asking people to come in for a finite amount of time. You want to give them a good time. You want to they all look at the script and go, well, this is just 2 weeks for me, isn't it? So, well, it can't be 2 weeks for everybody. So there'll be actually maybe the fun of, there'll be a whole month in the middle when you're all there together. Yes, the prospect of standing up in front of Judi Dench, Michelle Pfeiffer, Johnny Depp, Daisy Ridley, Derek Jacobi, Willem Dafoe, and telling them my cunning plans was a little intimidating. Yeah, that was probably the most intimidating.
Tell me what it was like to bring your cast together for the first time.
It was funny to see people, frankly, curtsying to Judi Dench, who's played the Queen so many times that presumably that's what brings it out of people. It was touching to see how shy everybody was, and then to see how excited they were to be in a scene where, as kind of premium performers themselves, they were, as it were, a background player. As a camera moved through the group and suddenly that person was on, that person happened to be, for one line, Michelle Pfeiffer. And then by the time you go to the end of the shot and the whole of the rail carriage, that background person happened to be Johnny Depp. And I think they really enjoyed the fun of that and really didn't want to let anybody down. So there was a great sort of esprit de corps. It doesn't always happen, but they really got on very, very well. And on their days off, they would meet and have games playing evenings, including murder mystery games. So boy, did they take the job home with them.
Amazing. And who won the murder mystery?
They were organized, the murder mystery games were organized by Penelope Cruz, who was as determined to win as anybody. The kind of court jester who used his brilliant and funny wit, Josh Gad, to unsettle everybody else. Quietly determined were people like Willem Dafoe. Shriekingly amused by it all were people like Daisy Ridley. She used to get the giggles. Derek Jacobi, phenomenally ambitious to win, and Judi Dench sort of just delirious in the middle of it all. But also they all wanted it. These are people at Christmas time or at holiday time. You wouldn't want to have these guys around your board game because they're ruthless.
Do you have an ideal method for directing actors, or is your ideal constantly shifting as you direct films?
It's an interesting way of putting it. I think that I do try and evolve what it is, I suppose, as an actor myself. I've now been exposed to a lot of different ways of working, sometimes chaotic, sometimes slow, sometimes quick, sometimes prepared, sometimes unready. And they variously produce, good work, or sometimes work from which you can learn. I like getting out of the way of actors now. I like to try and say less than I used to. It's trying to find that approach based on the thing itself. So for instance, day one, literally day one, when they came in to speak with us for the first time, we asked Josh Gad and Daisy Ridley to improvise a scene together as their characters. Now, they hadn't been asked to do that ahead of time. I didn't know whether they'd read the book or read anything about that, anything about their characters. They just went for it. And things came out of that first, okay, here we go moment that were kind of made their way into the film. Other people much more protected and careful in their way, but kind of anything works if it's true and good in the end, and being open to it, and not being too, in my case anyway, not being worried about being too, super prepared.
What's been the reaction of the cast now that the film is out? Any reactions from people?
There was great sort of pride and emotion, particularly on that very first evening when most of them saw it for the first time, which was at the world premiere at the Royal Albert Hall. And I walked in behind Michelle Pfeiffer. They were all there. It was a great thing, because, I mean, they really wanted to see each other again. That's a lot of people to show up for a movie. Michelle Pfeiffer walked into the Royal Albert Hall, and 5,000 people in the auditorium, and looked up at the size of the screen and said, "Jesus, that's big." I said, "Too big?" She said, "Nobody wants to be that big." And then afterwards I saw her, she said, "Oh no, it was good big. It was good big." And she was She was surprised, really pleased, very appreciative of everybody else's work, and surprised by how emotional it was, I think, and I think quietly proud of her contribution with the song at the end. And I think the others what I was really pleased to hear was how much they felt they'd each been given a chance to shine, that the ball was handed over to them and they carried it for a bit. I think they felt very proud being in. A lot of people were there with their families. Daisy Ridley was there with her mum and dad, and sort of even to be in the same scenes as Judi Dench for her and for her family was a great thing. So there's a great sense of pride. The show operated a bit like a family. It was a warm feeling, and it continued through to the seeing of the movie.
As you launch into home theater release for the film, do you think the grandness of the 65mm film will translate?
I think so. I think that the 65 bakes in a kind of majestic kind of density of colour and experience that I think Patrick Doyle's music really helps retain, and also the digital translation of this into the Blu-ray and the UHD and the DVD are really first rate. The digital revolution means that even these formats that, as it were, come from the cinematic dark ages, it would seem, shake hands with contemporary technology to do that cliched sounding thing, but bringing the thrill of cinema to your home theatre.
So you've put your own spin on this story. What were some of your own fascinations with this movie? I was really grabbed by the question of revenge and how revenge can really turn apparently civilized people into primitive individuals. Folk who might not ever consider wielding a knife in anger suddenly become truly dangerous because they're motivated by something way beyond the intellect. It's out of their guts. It's sort of a naked kind of sort of necessity for revenge that's ugly and kind of irrational and heeds nothing on its way. So it keeps under the skin of the film a very disturbing kind of energy. I mean, it's very arresting, very gripping, but pretty disturbing. I'm always amazed at how primitive, bestial, atavistic, primal these stories involving violent crime are. And Agatha Christie, who you imagine and see pictures of, and you hear her speak, and she conforms to everybody's idea in older age of a perfect English lady with a little cardigan and the pearls and everything. As a young woman, she was out there in dangerous parts of the world on her own, traveling, being quite the pioneer, and her edginess from her own life comes into the story, and that's what got me. That's what I felt was bubbling out from under this very formal world of trains and period. Oh, that's cool. What were the essential parts of Poirot that you wanted to bring across?
Poirot, I found to be very good company as a character. I liked being with him, near him, and on screen him. Agatha Christie, was asked to describe what she liked about him. She said she liked his compassion and his understanding of human frailties, interesting word, and his kindness. And his kindness I loved playing because it was at odds and in a kind of tension with his desire for the truth, with the exercise of the little grey cells, the determination to be rational, ordered, balanced, make the world work for you. Mm-hmm. And yet some of his own human instincts were already undoing that theory, whether it's indulging a little kid who's once again brought him 2 eggs that aren't the same size for his breakfast, which is so tragic for him, or this bigger issue of presenting this moral crusader, this moral absolutist man who says there's right, there's wrong, there's nothing in between. But by the end of this story, there's really quite a lot in between. He's discovered that for him to accommodate in his life, where he's trying to live a life as it should be, not as it is, and trying to do that morally, he now has to consider doing something that kind of compromises him, or does it, and that's going to be hard for him to live with, and can he? So that sensitivity of a man who attempts to be a kind of perfectionist knocking up against the imperfection of the world and his own character, and then maybe consider, maybe it's not imperfection, maybe it's humanity, and that, I know he's tough on himself, you know, he's pretty tough on himself, but he is kind and he is funny, and what other people would call eccentric, he calls his little originalities, and they're all fun to play.
Was your experience filming Dunkirk informing you on how you were going to make this film?
Working on Dunkirk, you could see how flexible large format film cameras could be. In that case, well, we didn't use much of this, but Christopher Nolan had Hoyte van Hoytema, his DP, handhold the cameras, which is a massive and ongoing feat of strength. They're hugely weighty and big, and yet they brought a kind of immediacy in that big scale format that was very inspiring in the sense of not feeling that 65 confined you to some sort of permanently majestic composition. It could be edgy and difficult. I think it definitely encouraged me to feel we used many more camera moves than we might otherwise have done, many more crane shots than we might otherwise have done, and to keep, particularly in a confined space movie, is keep experimenting and playing with the idea of large scale, small scale, epic, intimate, you know, mountainscape faces, this sort of breath between overwhelming sense of the environment and then just the world of, you know, the gaze. So I think those dynamics are all held in both those very, very different films. Obviously, so it's always, you're always happy to be influenced by a masterpiece, and that certainly was.
Mm-hmm. Were you asking a lot of questions or just being an observer?
I think when you work with somebody like Chris Nolan or Danny Boyle or any of these sort of great directors, you sort of feel it out. You know, I don't assume, oh, I direct so I can talk to you in a sort of directy fashion. I'm there as an actor, and you respect. If they, Christopher Nolan could find time to talk and seemed to, unless he's a better actor than any of us, he seemed to enjoy that possibility. There are always moments of you know, waiting on movies while something gets done, before, you know, some piece of equipment has to be moved, or in this case, a boat or a ship had to rearrange themselves. He was very open, but I try not to sort of quiz people. So what would you do if? And I wonder if, you know, I try not to do that, but I'm interested to watch and to have a conversation with him. We had some great conversations, yeah.
I have a hypothetical situation that will probably never happen to you, but let's say that you have to make a movie on a micro budget, like about $4 million. What kind of movie would you endeavor to make?
I would tell a horror film. I would do a horror film. And it would be about the possibility of the supernatural in a completely, entirely like uber normal world. And although, like everything else, everything's been done before, I actually would find myself back on a train. I live just outside London. I go into London by train quite a lot. And as many movies have suggested, it's a very sort of powerful environment, and there are a number of stories that you consider simply because you often find yourself on the, you know, same people are about. There's a different level of traveling microcosm of society, and certain sort of exceptions, you know, break various rules. So I'd put myself there, and then from that urban suburban normality, I'd go apocalyptic.
I want to see this movie. Okay, I have 4 more questions for you. First job you took that made you think, I've made it?
Well, I never took just to get my very first job was I answered an ad in the stage newspaper, like where in theory you get your first job, and sure enough I did. It involved going back to my hometown of Belfast, and I was on television in something called A Play for Today, a modern play slot that was on television, and it appeared one night, like an audience of 5 or 6 million back in the days when there were 3 channels, and I went into I was doing a play, and a woman behind a coffee bar said, oh, I saw your play last night. I said, oh, thanks very much. She said, oh, I thought you were good looking. with a quizzical frown. So it was a quick introduction to, well, so did I until about 2 minutes ago.
That's great. Best day of shooting for Murder on the Orient Express?
Best day of shooting would have been the train about to leave Istanbul station, where we had sort of 500 extras, we had all our actors, we had 3 cameras, we had a great Steadicam shot that introduced the train and the actors and the excitement of departure. And then in a separate shot, the train left the station and it left our soundstage. The doors to the soundstage opened and it left the soundstage and it went out on the mile of track that we'd created. And it was wildly exciting to have this fairly simple thing, train moves, but train moved from inside the soundstage of a movie studio outside and beyond, and people like Johnny Depp and Judi Dench were like kids on Christmas morning, and so was everybody else.
Last character you rapped out for the film?
Me. Was Hercule Poirot. Strangely enough, it was Hercule Poirot. I was there when everybody else was gone. The circus had left town, all the trailers had gone, and in one corner of the track was the little guy with the big moustache.
Worst directing misconception?
The misconception that I had was that maybe people would say this is the case, but I think I imagined that directors did and had to know everything. And on my very first job as a director, I realized that the most useful 3 words I would ever have, and it remains to this day, are I don't know. Don't say you do when you don't. Because you know what, if you can explain a bit how you feel or your attitude to the story, there'll be 150 people, one of whom will see it as their job to go, but you could do this with the camera or whatever, and so the collaborative process that is film emerges.
Lovely, wonderful. Kenneth, thank you so much for being with us today.